Squirrels! So hello, and welcome to another Legend of Runeterra video. My name is Chris. Today we are going to be taking a look at the best followers at each mana cost that there is, and I'm sure that this will cause a lot of debate and controversy amongst the people, with you all arguing with me about what exactly is the best overall follower from each mana cost. Now, my criteria for doing this, I don't have like a set criteria of what I'm going to necessarily talk about because, cards are good for different reasons. Sometimes stats matter perhaps more for certain things than they do others, and certain abilities might be better somewhere than somewhere else. Basically, I'm just going to talk about it as I go through with it and, sort of give my own explanations. I've decided to do followers only, not champions, because I feel like, if we included champions in this, oh, guess what? The best one drop is probably Zoe, and the best two drop is probably Action. We just keep going and going and going, like with just a bunch of champions. So I thought, let's just stick with followers. Tomorrow we'll do spells, and I'm hoping, to be honest, by that point that spoiler season has started, and then we can start really ramping up on that and talking about those cards and things like that. So keep your eye out for that as well. But yeah, that's the basics of what is going to happen, and so let's kick it off, and we will start with 0 mana. And as you can see here, there are only 3 0 mana cards that you can play, and it's pretty obvious which one is the best, and that is Ravenous Butcher. I'm sure that this one wouldn't have too much debate, and so that's the first one done. Ravenous Butcher is the best 0 mana card. Moving on to the 1-drops though, and now we could probably get some debate going, and I think that this will be probably one of the toughest ones to do and will cause some debate. Some of the sort of things that I have mentioned down here are Crackshot Corsair. Of course, I'm sure many of you would agree that that should be up there. Another one I thought about a lot was Fleet Feather Tracker, and whether that should be in there. And there definitely are some other good options as well, like Legion Rearguard and Legion Saboteur that you see quite a lot. But I have gone with something else, and that is, if I can find it, Treasure Seeker. I've gone for Treasure Seeker for one particular reason over all of the others, and that is, the Treasure Seeker is just more flexible than the others. Treasure Seeker is perhaps the best 1-drop to, draw on turn 6, because when you get this Waking Sands, it can really stop a whole opponent's attack. It can be like just giving you a way of saying your opponent won't attack this turn, which can be the difference between winning the game or not. Or, conversely, it can give you something which can push 5 extra damage if your opponent can't block it. 5 extra damage is a quarter of your opponent's Nexus health. That is extremely valuable, and for just paying 2 mana for it is very, very useful to you indeed. If you start thinking about this as like a Decimate that you can use at 2 mana, then you start to realize, this card is pretty good. Now, obviously, it can be blocked, right? But in certain situations, your opponent just won't have the cards to be able to block it. And so it can become a 2-mana Decimate, which is, of course, very, very strong. And so that's the reason that I think Treasure Seeker is slightly above the others, just because it is more powerful, even if you pick it up, quite late on into the game, but it's still perfectly viable as well playing it on turn 1. It probably isn't the strongest 1-drop on turn 1, but I think because you can play at any point in the game and still feel pretty good about, getting the Waking Sands, I think that it is a pretty powerful card overall in that sense, and I have it as my most powerful 1-drop. Okay, so moving on to our 2-drops, and of course we have a lot of good options here, as we will for all of sort of the lower mana cost, because of course there's a lot of cards there that see play, because that's where most cards see play. Of course, Bright Steel Protector I think would be a good option. Conchologist, of course, as well is another good option. Obviously, Curse Keeper would have been one that we might have considered. Eye of the Dragon is definitely in the considerations as well. That one's been living for a long time, and I'm even skipping over some good cards here like Fading Icon, Fortune, Croaker, maybe Greenglade Duo, House Spider. I'm skipping over quite a lot of these good cards because there are so many good options. Loping Telescope, Marai Warden. This one might be one of the hardest ones, I think, for sure, because as you go down the list, you're seeing like, that's a pretty good card. Ooh, that's a pretty good card as well. And there's still more that I want to mention, like Young Witch as well. Old War Chefs might have even won this, way back in the day when it was a 2-3. Plenty of good options to pick from here, but I think the one I am going to go for is Conchologist, because a similar sort of thing to Treasure Seeker, really. Conchologist is not only a good 2-drop on turn 2, but is a good 2-drop throughout the game. It's just an absolutely crazy 2-drop to get at any point in the game, because manifesting a spell that costs 3 or less from your regions can easily win you a game or give you a card that you desperately desire. And to have a 2/2 body that comes along with getting like a Pokey Stick or a Mystic Shot or a Glimpse Beyond or a Vile Feast or whatever it is, it always is going to help you. This card is so often going to net you so much value. At the very least, it's going to give you a card to discard. At the very least, you're just going to get some card, which is at least worth something in and of itself. But a good majority of the time, you're going to get a card that is actually really quite useful and really quite strong. And so for that reason alone, I think Conchologist, and I'm sure, despite there being a lot of good options here, I think most of you will actually pretty much agree with this one, because Conchologist is an insane card. I actually, was thinking about this and thinking about the value that this card gets you. This card might be balanced as a 1/1, which, taking away 1/1 stats from a 2-drop is a massive nerf. But I was actually thinking that genuinely might be the level this needs to get to be like an average card or slightly above average card. That's how strong this card is. That is my belief, that is how strong this card is. It is a pretty insane card. Moving on to the 3-drops, and I never really realized how many 3-drop champions we actually have, but as you can see, there is a lot, and we have instantly cards that you could put in there. Arachnoid Sentry, Bandle City Mare, some really good options. Blight Caretaker even, it's kind of fallen off as of late, but even so, still a very good card. Doom Beast, of course, very good. Endless Devout, would you consider that in there as well? There are some very good options in the 3-drop, as you would expect as well. Merciless Hunter as well. Even after the nerf, I'd still think is a very strong card overall. Even things like River Shaper, Shadow Assassin, the buff Solari Priestess as well. There are plenty of good options for the 3-drop as a whole, and the buffed Vanguard Sergeant as well definitely gets a consideration from me. This card I think is very strong as a 3/4 as well, and so there's plenty of good options that you could consider putting on here, and I'm sure I've probably missed some as well as I was scrolling through. But I think the one I'm going to go for, and this was probably the closest one for me, this one was really, really tricky because there isn't one like maybe a Conchologist that like stands out at this particular moment in time as being like, something that we all kind of want to see nerfed perhaps. So maybe there isn't like the vitriol with some of these cards that perhaps there is with others. Maybe Mare you would consider being in that list. But I think, honestly, I am going to go for Doom Beast. And, maybe this is kind of a bit of a sign of what I look for in a card. And maybe some of you would disagree, and I could definitely understand the arguments for other options, particularly with this one. Like, if you disagree with me on this one, I could definitely hear you out, and I probably could be convinced that it is something else, to be honest. I am going to go with Doom Beast just because of the sort of versatility of the card, and the fact that, achieving Nightfall is never that difficult, and this effect is always really good. Like, there's never a time when this card is going to be somewhat useless to you. This card is always going to be pretty good, whereas I think with a lot of the other ones, they require either more sort of setup to be good or require a certain thing to happen. Whereas I think Doom Beast, unless you can't achieve the Nightfall, which I think is really rare, that's the only time that it is, not a good card, because the effect is just so strong. Just the straight drain is just really, really good in so many different decks. You could play this in pretty much every single deck you wanted to. And I just think that this is it's just a very strong, versatile card that kind of fits in a good place as well. I think a lot of the cards on this list, many people would consider cards that probably might need a nerf. But actually, Doom Beast is one that I think we're all probably happy with. It's in a good spot. But I still think it's a pretty strong card. Moving on to the 4-drops, and similar sort of thing. I'd never realized how many 4-drop champions there were in the game. More than I thought. But with 4-drops... this one got quite a bit easier because there are still some good options. Of course, Aloof Travelers might have been on this list, but after the nerf, I think we can probably agree it probably isn't up there as much. This one could have been more interesting. I mean, there's still good cards. Because Sandspear is still a fine card, and like Crowd Favorite could even fit in certain decks, and Naturalist might have its place, and Grizzled Ranger's probably still decent, and there's a few decent cards. I mean, Zap Sprayfin down here at the bottom is obviously a pretty interesting card as well, and that's the Solari Sunforger is just a nice card as well. But obviously Lecturing Yordle I think just takes the cake. A lot of people were wrong about this card, but this is one that I actually got right. Where I thought that this card would be insane because there's 3/5 stat line. The fact that it's going to give you 2 darts pretty much guaranteed almost always, unless your opponent trades unfavorably with like a 5 mana Thermo Beam, and even then you've still got the 1 Poison Dart. Like, this card is just so often going to trade like 3 for 1, which is just, like, that is just nuts. You know, like, as in, you're going to play, you'll get 1 Poison Dart, you'll attack, they'll have to trade into it. And they probably won't have something that can actually kill it, so they'll probably have to play another card to kill it. And you've got 2 Poison Darts at that point, so you can probably at least kill off 1 unit of their board at that point. If not 2, and make it a 4 for 1 card trade instead. Like, just an absolutely insane value for this card. And this is one that I do think needs a nerf, because I just think it's just above the level of all the other 4-drops, as I've just pointed out. And I don't think there'd be too much debate about this one. Now we come to the 5 mana cards, and with 5 mana it's actually more interesting than I thought, because there isn't as many strong 5-drops as I actually remember. It seems like they tend to nerf the ones that are pretty good. You know, we've had some very strong ones in the past. Obviously, like Shelly kind of, you know, didn't get nerfed directly, but the deck kind of did pretty heavily. Jack the Winner got nerfed in the past. I mean, Kato maybe you consider. You know, Radiant Guardian, obviously, is probably a good consideration here as a good 5-drop. I'd consider Ravun as well as a pretty good 5-drop. Obviously, Rune Runner probably would have taken this pretty easily back in the day. Screeching Dragon is obviously a very good 5-drop as well. But as you can see, there isn't, like, as many, like, clearly... I mean, Tarkaz is okay as well. But there isn't as many clearly broken things as you might think. And so my actual answer for this is Ravun Daylight Spear. Probably a bit of a surprise to some of you. But the reason that this card, I think, is the strongest 5-drop is simply this stat line, this 5/6 stat line, has consistently shown itself to be so strong. Like, incredibly strong. This stat line is, and you can, you know, compound that with the fact that it gives you a card in hand as well with this stat line. It's just really, really good. And it gives you this extra effect as well, which, you know, depending on what deck you're playing, you know, could either be very crucial or could just be a nice extra benefit as well. That is just all in one combined. I think that this just makes this the strongest 5-drop when we're talking about the overall impact of a card, because as soon as you play this card, you kind of own the board on turn 5. And even if you're not playing on turn 5, it's still going to be a very difficult thing for your opponent to deal with, because, you know, once you start getting past 5, your opponent might not play 6, 7, 8, 9 drops. You know, they might not play those cards, and so they might not have something with 6 attack to start off with. But then you've always got the extra card in hand as well, and you've got this side extra effect that it's always there. I just think that this card is just very strong on just a generic power level, and you don't even have to play it with any other day rate cards, and it would still be a very strong card. Okay, now we're starting to get up there into the 6 manas, and, you know, we're starting to get less and less cards now. So when we talk about the 6 mana cards, you know, there's some more obvious, I think, options here. Cithria would probably be in there. Karina, Shellfolk would probably be in there. And then you start squinting and start looking at some of these other cards. I mean, Scattered Pod is a decent card. But, you know, I mean, Burblefish will technically count for this as well. You could also put in there. But for me, this one is, you know, perhaps a bit obvious and perhaps a bit going off the current meta. And that is Shellfolk. You know, of all the 6-drops that tend to have, you know, decks built around them to some degree, Shellfolk has clearly been the one that has made the biggest impact and been, you know, sort of the biggest winner when it comes to 6-drops in this sort of way of having a deck completely built around you and just creating such a strong effect. Now, of course, this one, it kind of is a bit weird, because without, you know, the use of pranks and having, you know, good cards that can easily make pranks and Octopus and all of that, you know, Shellfolk wouldn't be as good. It kind of needed that extra support, but because it got it, you know, Shellfolk is a pretty dominant card, and I think for that reason, it takes the 6 mana achievement award. Onto the 7-drops, so now, you know, we really are starting to get down there. I mean, Ancient Yeti you might consider. Eclipse Dragon, of course. Hydravine, I think we can all agree, is a pretty strong card, and then Rekindler as well. But as you can see, we're starting to get to less and less cards. But my answer for this is Hydravine, mainly because without Hydravine, I think Viego would really be bad. And unlike, you know, perhaps some of the other options on this list, like Eclipse Dragon, for instance, Hydravine is always good. You know, if you have Eclipse Dragon and you don't have like a Aurelion Sol in hand, it can feel like not amazing. It's still good, but not amazing. Whereas Hydravine, I think, is always really strong and like something your opponent has to deal with straight away. Otherwise, they pretty much are going to lose the game. And so for that reason, I am going to pick Hydravine. And I do think that Hydravine is just a really good design, and I wish more cards were on the power level of Hydrovine for a 7 mana card. It just feels like there isn't enough 7 mana cards that, like Hydrovine, where it's like, you have to really get rid of me now. Like this turn now, otherwise you're in trouble. And I wish there were more of those in the game, because I think that that's overall pretty good for the game. And, you know, I'm not a massive fan of the prismatics, but on Hydrovine it looks pretty cool, I won't lie. This is, if you get the chance, prismatic Hydrovine, because this looks pretty cool. And now we come to 8 plus, and we'll start with 8, and obviously we're getting to less and less and less cards here, but we start with Captain Farron, of course, as a good option. Lost Soul in there as well, another very good option to have. And then you might consider the Dreadway, Leviathan in there as well. But as you can see, there aren't too many options here at the 8 mana level. But overall, I think I am going to go for, Jawfish as well. I think I'm still going to go for Lost Soul, though. Just because I think that this card still enables a lot. Now, this is a bit of a weird one, of course, because you very rarely actually play Lost Soul at 8. But this is sort of the rules that I'm going with. This is an 8 mana card. So I will include it in the 8 mana section. And I think, you know, this card is just a strong card to just constantly be discarding. It just gives you so much value. I think when you're playing against those kind of Scion decks or any discard decks that's running Lost Soul, sometimes the difference can be, did they draw a Lost Soul? Because if they have that recursive engine that they can just continually discard and know that they can be okay, you know, it's such a good way of leveling up Scion as well. I just think that this enables so much for that deck and what is going on there. I do think a Lost Soul will take it, but it's probably pretty close. Moving on to the 9 mana cards. There actually isn't that many 9 mana cards at all. There's only 5 of them. So this one should be pretty easy, and it's probably between Brightsteel and Ledros. I mean, maybe Mina you would put in there, but I think Ledros is pretty clearly the winner. Has been played in the most decks, almost certainly. And yeah, it's just very strong. You know, we don't need to spend too much time on this one. Ledros is pretty good. The same could also be said of the 10 mana cards. There's only 6 of them, of course, some of them being the ones that you discount. But with that said, I think overall the strongest is probably Cytheria, Lady of Clouds, but I could definitely see arguments for She Who Wanders and maybe even Atakan as well. But I think I will go for Cytheria. I think of these, she's kind of the most reliably good. And you know, obviously with a lot of these 10 mana cards, the idea is that you want to cheat them out a bit earlier. So I think Cytheria probably does have the biggest impact. And then at 12, there is only one card. So Sandstone Chimera gets its own award at the 12 slot as well. And so there it was. There's all of my answers for the strongest followers in each mana cost. Tomorrow we will be looking at spells as well and going through the best spells in each mana cost, which I'm sure will create a lot of debate, particularly with 2 mana, because I'm sure, you know, you can start thinking about all the 2 mana spells that there are and going, there's going to be a lot of debate on that one in terms of which one is the best. But with that said, thank you so much for watching and have a really nice day.